and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to Linguistic Phonics for Multilingual Learners. I'm going to tell just a little bit more about who I am and where I'm from. Today we'll be focusing on multilingual learners who speak Spanish at home, although the strategies that I will share today will work for kids from all backgrounds. So, just a little bit of background before I get started. I'm a bilingual educator, and most of my experience was in special education, and I taught in a dual language context as well. I am currently lucky enough to be the deputy director of Colorado, which is a literacy nonprofit that was founded by my mother and I last year in Denver. And we provide scholarship and mentorship for teachers to train in evidence-based literacy instruction, also known as EBLI, and we also teach kids. So you can learn more about us on our website if you're in Colorado, especially. We'd love to hear from you. I've taught in a Spanish-English dual language context in elementary school, and I currently provide intervention for multilingual students who speak Spanish using EBLI. So let's get into it. Just to provide a little context for those of you who may be unaware, there are over 4 million multilingual learners who speak Spanish at home in the United States, and the most recent data we have is from 2021, so I would estimate this number has actually even gone up. And those Spanish speakers make up over 76% of the total multilingual learners. So they are the vast majority of students who are English language learners in our school. And they make up over 8% of total student enrollment. So that's a significant number of our students, regardless if you teach in an English language development context or not. And the last statistic there in the yellow, over 830 of our multilingual students were identified as students with disabilities. So this signifies that they are overrepresented in intervention and special education contexts. So just to ground it in the research a little bit, English language proficiency is positively associated with initial performance and growth in ELA and math. So English language proficiency is crucial to the success in other academic areas in our school. And dual language programs have the strongest potential for positive outcomes for our students. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to be bilingual or teach in a dual language context to help these students, although that is the experience that I'm speaking from personally today. The strategies that I'm teaching about today, or that I will share with you today, will be beneficial for kids even if you don't speak their home language. So all of these colorful boxes here kind of represent the different components that I have identified as being crucial for success for multilingual learners in their English language development of the written English alphabetic code, so reading and writing in English. So starting with numbers 1 and 2, the contrasting phonologies between English and Spanish, or English in their home language, as well as the differing relationship between sounds and letters, this is called phoneme-grapheme correspondence, are really crucial for kids to have as a foundation before they can start to move into the other areas, which are more commonly talked about when we're talking about basic reading instruction for all students. So I'm going to get into some of these areas today. I am a huge nerd about all of this, and I wish I could talk to you all day and forever about each of these things. So if there's something you see on this board that we don't get into today, please reach out, and I'm happy to discuss strategies to support these areas of development more. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I want to ground us a little bit in, as today is all about the science of learning, what is the same and what is different between Spanish and English, because understanding what makes students' home language similar or different to English is really crucial to helping them to acquire English. So first of all, Spanish and many other languages of the world have what's called a transparent or a shallow orthography. This essentially means that there's consistent one-to-one correspondence between sounds and letters within the language. And English is an opaque language with a very, very, very deep orthology, meaning that orthography, which means that our letters and sounds do not consistently relate to one another, and we often use 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 letters to represent one sound that's spoken in English. So English has a lot more phonemes, a lot more sounds than Spanish does. We use 44 phonemes in English, and about 21 of those sounds do not exist in Spanish, which can make it very difficult for students to acquire English. Some of these are consonant sounds, like the th sound represented by TH in thin, or the th sound in this, which is a slightly different sound. But about 10 to 15 of those sounds are vowels, and this kind of varies based on dialect and region and what kind of Spanish students may speak. Additionally, there's a couple sounds that we don't use in Spanish that are used in English, but there's far fewer of those. There's about 21 of the 24 sounds of Spanish which are common with English. So just a little bit more comparison. The relationship between phonemes and graphemes, or letters and sounds, in English and Spanish differs for quite a few of our consonants. So you can see, for example, the h sound, like in the word hot in English, would not be represented by the letter H. It would be represented typically by the letter J, or a jota, and it would be in a word like joya. Whereas that same letter, the H, is a silent letter in Spanish. So in a word like hombro, we actually don't pronounce that letter at all. So these can be really confusing for students who may be fluent readers in Spanish because they need to learn to apply letters and sounds, that relationship differently as they're acquiring English. Something else that's different has to do with the rhythm and the accentuation used in Spanish. I don't have a lot of time to get into that today, but in English, these things are implied based on the origin of a word. So, for example, the word conduct and conduct looked exactly the same on paper, and you need to know based on meaning and where the word's origin comes from, how to correctly pronounce that word. Whereas in Spanish, these things are reliable, and if something doesn't follow the stress and pattern rules, an accentuation mark is applied, as in the difference between animo, animo, or animo, which are different forms of the same verb in Spanish. We don't use those, which leaves our multilingual kiddos who speak Spanish guessing at how these words apply stress in English. So, for other languages other than Spanish, there's a really fantastic resource called Bilinguistics. They offer a world language library where speech and language pathologists have documented the differences between English and a vast number of other languages of the world. This is super useful for understanding which sounds may not be used in a student's home language, and some of those other kind of comparisons that I provided between English and Spanish, they can provide those for you with a language like Swahili or French. So, getting into linguistic phonics, also known as speech to print instruction, here we're going to discuss how a couple of these key tenets of linguistic phonics apply to our Spanish speakers. So, starting with the basics, words are made up of sounds. Identifying the sounds in English words is the first step to correctly pronouncing, reading, and spelling those words. And I'm going to provide some strategies to support students with this today. Additionally, one, two, three, or four letters may represent one sound in English, whereas in Spanish, it's pretty consistently a one-to-one correspondence, with a few exceptions where two letters represent one sound, but there's no instances in which three or four letters would represent one sound. So additionally, one phoneme may be represented by a variety of graphemes, as in one sound may be represented by a variety of combinations of letters, and conversely, one letter may represent a variety of sounds depending on the word. This can be super confusing for our multilingual students because typically the one-to-one correspondence is transparent or consistent in Spanish with a few exceptions. So we have instances where there's regularly 8 to 10 ways to spell a particular sound, or 8 to 10 sounds that a letter may represent, and that's not something our students will have encountered before in their home language. So something that we can really leverage that is crucial in linguistic phonics instruction is leveraging the innate process of probability matching, also known as statistical learning, that our brains engage in when we are able to derive patterns by being exposed to various input. So students who can already read or write in Spanish or in their home language can innately use this statistical learning to analyze and acquire the similarities and differences between Spanish and English, or whatever their home language may be in English, in order to acquire English more quickly. Let's get into the strategies. I'll be sharing on a couple of different strategies today, and there are videos linked in. I will place some of them, but others I will not in the interest of time. And these slides will be shared with you so that you can check out the videos at a later time if you'd like. So, getting back to that first tenet, words are just a combination of sounds. And when we see a word on the page, that is just a code for what sounds we need to produce with our mouths in order to say that word. We need to get to that very basic sound production with our English language learners to help them have the tools they need in order to get English words off the page. So this is kind of getting at that foundational aspect I hinted at the beginning, the articulation of English sounds and sounds that may not exist in Spanish that our students will need to use, and then how to develop awareness and the ability to manipulate those sounds of English. Getting back to uh, the mother of all linguistic phonics, Diane McGinnis, she really stressed the importance of students' ability to isolate, segment, and blend sounds to form words as being really crucial and foundational, and this is how we can apply that to our multilingual students. I just want to also note that I am not advocating for erasing accent in any way, but I am stressing that students need to understand what sounds they may not have ever heard or used that we're using in English. For example, the th sound can be very difficult for English language learners to produce. They will need to be explicitly taught how to do these things in order to read that word, that sound in words, and to spell that sound correctly while writing. So we can explicitly teach students how to do this by saying something like stick your tongue between your teeth and blow. And I have my students look at my face a lot while we're doing the activities that I'm about to show you so that they can see what I'm doing with my tongue in order to correctly produce that sound. So the first strategy that I'm suggesting is the use of minimal pairs. Minimal pairs is a tried and true speech and language pathology activity in which we help students correctly differentiate between the sounds in similar words. This is some examples at the bottom, like ban and van, fin and thin, where only one of the sounds that we hear is different. So how can we use this with students? At the end, I will have a very long list of these minimal pairs linked in that are specifically designed for challenging sounds for Spanish speakers. For example, she and she, in which the sound s and sh are being directly practiced. We're going to explain to our students first how we want them to make that sound. Make your lips round and push your air through like this. Sh. Or for younger kids, I sometimes do like a kissy face, and then we go shh to form the sound with our lips correctly. So when I apply this, this is like a 2-minute, 3-minute activity that we might do at the beginning where we're going to be seeing this word in our reading. And first we say the first word. As a note, the students are not looking at this list. This list is for the teachers. And I might say see, have the students repeat it, and then have them say see, and crisply segment the sounds s, e. Then we'll say she, sh, e. And I'm insisting that the students correctly form the sh sound each of the time we practice the words in the pairs on this list, sock or shock. And as an added extension or to be focusing as well on that phoneme grapheme correspondence, we could also have students reading and writing these words. Although I would say to avoid cognitive overload and to manage the cognitive load for students, I don't recommend doing that at first because as you'll notice, the sound s and sh are not the only difference between some of these words. For example, seat and sheet have different spellings for the E sound as well. So now we're adding in a lot more variables that would be confusing, which is why I emphasize doing this orally first or until students develop proficiency. Another activity, and I'm going to show a very short video of me working with a 4th grade student who is new to the country and does not yet speak English on practicing our phoneme deletion. So this activity requires students to first segment and then remove a sound from an English word. And she had already done this with me, I would estimate 4 or 5 times prior to the video you're about to see. So I'll go ahead and play.
Dilo, frog. Todo junto, frog. Sí, qual são as dois? A. Frog. Frog. ¿Sabes lo que significa frog? Es como una rana, un sapo. ¿Sí? Frog. Frog. ¿Sí? Dilo frog. Frog. Quita el frog. Sí. Sí, dilo frog. Frog. Quita el g. Frog. ¿Sí? Frog. 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 Quita el Frog. A. G. Frog. Oh. Frog. Fog, ¿sí? Frog. Frog, si no, es frog. Fog, muy bien.
So I hope that wasn't as quiet for you as it was for me. However, I just want to point out as well that I'm quite picky with the kids about the vowel sounds, as there's a lot of vowel sounds that we use in English that they may not have heard before in Spanish. So after a few more sessions of practice, let's see the same student doing this again with more independence.
Dilo slip. Slip. ¿Qué voy a decir slip? O, E. Dilo slip. Slip. Quita el s. Slip. Muy bien. Ok, slip. Slip. Quita el p. Slip. Muy bien. Dilo slip. Slip. Quita el u. Sip. Sip. Qué bueno. Ok, no necesitamos practicarlo más porque ya puedes hacerlo muy bien.
So as the students build independence with this type of activity, which is oral only, this will translate directly to their ability to read and decode words in English as well. Another suggestion for supporting English articulation is phoneme substitution. This is kind of like the word chaining switch it that we saw in the previous session with reading simplified. So what this chain of words that you see here is one that I developed specifically to have more sounds that are difficult for students who are learning English. So say ship, change the e to ah, shop, and continuing on through practicing the sounds deliberately and ensuring that students can manipulate those sounds of English. So, a great free resource, which Jen just spoke about as well, is the Switch It game, which you can download for free from Reading Simplified. It's a great way to bring this into your classroom. The materials you receive look like this, and they have that soundboard as well, where students are connecting the grapheme, the letters to what they hear as well. So, moving along, as we transition from these oral activities and students are mastering the sounds of English, we can apply that to more and more challenging words. Our students really struggle oftentimes to figure out what sounds they even hear in a word. That is because we also use a lot more consonant clusters in English than they do in Spanish. So words that have 2 or 3 consonants next to each other may be difficult for students to identify what they hear. There's a lot of great ways to do this. I use Ebley, so I use the strategy here to the right, which we call sound lines, although plenty of other approaches use things like Alconin boxes. And really what matters at the end of the day is that students are crisply segmenting the sounds that they hear in words in order to correctly read and spell those words. The biggest game changer for me is applying this to multisyllabic words like the word emergency. So in many countries in Latin America, students are taught to read with syllabus, with syllables first. So segmenting or syllabication is something they can do quite naturally. So helping kids to transfer that skill to English and first figuring out what syllables or what parts are inside a long word like emergency, emergency, and then breaking each of those down into the sounds is really crucial because first we want to ensure that students aren't leaving any sounds out, and then we can start to go back and apply how many letters are representing the sound in this word. So, comparing the familiar aspects of the home language with English is super useful for students because it allows them to apply the statistical learning, their ability to recognize patterns and match between the languages, kind of in the background. And so I'm going to provide some strategies for helping students to identify the relationship between graphemes and phonemes in their home language and English. This kind of gets into the vocabulary piece as well. So it's This quote is basically just from the research signaling that it would be impossible to teach all of these regularities to kids. There's just too much going on with English, and allowing kids to detect these clues implicitly allows them to speed their progress along. So here's an example of cognates that are from a couple of my lessons. The ones on the left were focusing on the E sound in English, and the ones on the right were focusing on the F sound in English. So basically, all I do is provide the word in English and Spanish with a visual clue as to its meaning. I discuss with students in Spanish what the word means in Spanish first, and then I'm going to show in a moment some guiding questions that can help students to identify the similarities and differences and begin to build that schema about where English and Spanish are similar, which will in turn allow them to recognize more vocabulary automatically when reading without ever having to be told what it means. So first, we say the words aloud. Photograph, fotografía. What parts sound the same? I'll ask my students to first just, orally identify what may be similar and different between the words. What parts may be different? This is also a great moment to have a little morphology moment and talk about the meaning associated with a part of a word that's consistent between the two languages. And then I can say, in very simple and concise language, sometimes two letters represent the f, or sometimes we double in English, which is not something that occurs in Spanish. Thinking about a word like difficult, where it appears very similar, but we do need to double that letter F. Or the same with office, or how we use PH to represent F in a word like photograph. So if you don't speak Spanish, there's some great resources out there to learn more about these cognates to support your student. This website is called Learn with Cognates. I believe the URL isn't particularly memorable, but I will make sure the link gets into the chat. So you can search here by rule. So basically, these are very consistent morphology rules that transfer between English and Spanish. For example, words in English that end in shun almost always end in sion in Spanish. And when students start to recognize these parts, they can build that schema and the statistical learning takes over, and they will start to recognize all these words on the right because of their visual similarity with Spanish. And as they learn to articulate in English as well, we can make the difference, we can make the jump from actual to actual between Spanish and English much more easily. You will be absolutely amazed if you are not bilingual about just how much similarity and overlap there is, and this is super high leverage for kiddos. So additionally, pre-teaching vocabulary allows students to reduce the demand on the cognitive load. So when we're reading an authentic text in English, and I do read pretty much exclusively authentic texts with all of my students, there's a lot that needs to occur simultaneously within the brain. So I choose a couple of vocabulary words, typically 4, maybe 6, to teach students ahead of time, utilizing 1 to 2 cognates to bridge over that learning of saying these words look very similar and they share the same meaning. And then also picking a couple words that are really crucial to making meaning and comprehending a text. So this kind of starts to make the bridge over of where vocabulary and comprehension meet. And one of the assets is if you're in a bilingual context, allowing students to express this comprehension in their home language is really crucial. I'm often amazed by how well they understand what they've read, but they might struggle to explain to me what they've read in English. But comprehension is a skill that doesn't require language, right? So students can comprehend and think in whatever language and demonstrate that comprehension in their stronger language if you're in a bilingual context. So what I wanted to highlight here is the processing advantage that we provide students with. This relates back to cognitive load. Students are much more likely to be able to comprehend complex text if they already are familiar with the vocabulary from explicit pre-teaching. So here's an example of a vocabulary preview for my students that was a text related to pirates. I chose one word strategically that was a cognate to point out that criminals and criminales sound very similar. And also, delinquents is just like delincuentes, but we would not really call a criminal a delinquent in colloquial English. So it's a point for me to say, yeah, those sound the same, but we don't really use that word this way in English, which is also quite common with cognates. I also picked I picked something that's more of a tier one, a really high impact words for kids to know, like dangerous. And then I pick a couple that are more sophisticated or tier two or three vocabulary words that are going to be crucial to understanding the text. In this text about pirates, it was all about keeping colonists captive for ransom. So we need to know those words in order to understand what's going to be going on. And I do keep this visual handy for kids while they're reading and allow them to reference it because the connection of the visual, the definition in the home language, and the word and definition in English is really impactful. So there's this absolutely fantastic research done about what students need to understand and in what order about vocabulary as they acquire vocabulary in their second language. The link to this article will be at the end. So first, students need to understand the form of the word, its spoken form, its written form, and its word parts. So these questions aren't questions I would necessarily directly ask the students, but for us as educators, it's really important to think about this first tier first. What does the word sound like? How is it pronounced? What does it look like? How is it written and spelled, and so on. And then we get into the more nuanced areas, such as the associations of the word, the use of the word. And I would not recommend using all of these questions or thinking about all of these. You need to think about the kids in front of you. And for our newer ELs, we're really focusing on the form of the word and then kind of relating that to meaning. And for kids as they're developing more vocabulary, we want to get more into um, the constraints or the associations. So, for example, I might want to say to point out to kids that like a captive, which was one of my words here, would be used to describe someone who's taken and not allowed to leave. But I don't know that I would maybe use that to describe some animals, but I wouldn't say that about my dog, even though she isn't really allowed to leave either. And you can kind of have interesting conversations with kids to help them understand the nuance associated with word use in English. So this is me in that same fourth grader doing a vocabulary preview. I'm going to show just the first part where we're going to be comparing a cognate in English and Spanish.
Palabras de vocabulario que necesitamos saber. Para ti en inglés, patient. Patient. ¿Qué significa patient, crees? Pensar. No es pensar. Paciente. Paciente. Mira qué tan similar suenan. Patient. Patient. Paciente. Paciente. Muy similar, ¿sí? ¿Y qué significa ser paciente? Cuando esperas a alguien. Sí, esperas a alguien, sí. Significa como mantener la calma mientras esperando, ¿sí? En inglés es el mismo, ¿sí? Stay calm while you wait, ¿sí? ¿Tiene sentido? Este es patient. Ok, la próxima. Repítelo, attic. Attic. Ok, ¿en qué significa? Ático. Ático. ¿Tu casita tiene un ático? ¿No? ¿Has visto un ático? Como este área superior de una casa, ¿sí? Perfecto. Entonces,
So those are just a couple examples. The first two happen to be cognates in this case, which gives her a leg up and an advantage to know what they mean. So, just to wrap up, I wanted to share a little bit of student work and data from the Colorado pilot program, which was in a Denver public school last year. I worked with students, and we also had two bilingual trainee instructors who were implementing this with their students, who you will see here. Something I want to point out is that the service time was very limited for these students. Most of them had less than 20 hours of instruction with me. One of them, due to you guys know how it is in schools, the scheduling constraints, one of my kids was able to get more time with me than the others. But this is quite limited for students who didn't yet speak English to make the progress that you can see here. So the red indicates their pre-scores and the green indicates their post-scores. We have their reading fluency and correct words per minute over here on the left. The biggest one to the most important data to me is this accuracy. And I hypothesize that their growth in this accuracy stems from that articulation practice that I spend a lot of time with them on because they're able to correctly get a word off the page. Even if they don't know what it means, they're more likely to produce the sounds correctly and to understand the ways that the phonemes and graphemes relate. So these are some fantastic work samples from our trainee instructors. So these are folks who just started doing this, and the work On this slide is our kindergarteners. So these kindergartners don't yet speak English, and one of them wrote Field Day was fun. The trampoline was my favorite with fantastic English, using the oral rehearsal, first talking about what he wanted to say in Spanish and bridging that to English, and then he was able to write it on his own. And I'm going to play this quick video of some of our kindergartners reading a sentence they had just written in English for you.
Most food we eat is grown and harvested on farms.
Good job. So, such sweeties. That was our kindergartners, and these are our fourth graders who are working with a trainee instructor. So these students also speak Spanish at home, and you can see an example of a vocabulary activity that I wish I had had time to share today, in which a student is identifying and examining the differences in a cognate in English and Spanish, and defining and writing a sentence using that cognate. And then we also have some independent writing about what the students will do in the summer. So we orally rehearse each sentence prior to them writing it, and they were able to tell all about what they were going to do on summer vacation. So I love to hear questions that folks may have. Before I do, I want to point out that I have all those resources that I've shared today linked in here, as well as some recommendations in terms of program usage. Reading Simplified is fantastic for our younger kids, and Ebbly is great for little ones and older students, particularly middle schoolers and high schoolers. When our students come to us, or maybe enter the country at an older age, it's very unlikely that they're going to get this direct instruction in the similarities and differences of English and how to decode and encode in English. So Ebbly is a fantastic choice for helping them with that. I also really love using Releasing Writers, also known as Think SRSD, for writing and writing expansion, and Visualizing and Verbalizing for oral language development. That program can be done very well bilingually. We can kind of adapt it very naturally to bilingual students. So if you work in a bilingual context, I recommend V&V, Visualizing and Verbalizing, as well. So
Okay, so here are your questions. Thoughts on translanguaging?
translanguaging is so crucial. For those who aren't familiar, it's essentially the bridge that we build between the home language and English. So I think that being in a dual language concept, we're doing this translanguaging and modeling this translanguaging naturally, where I might talk with students first about what they want to write in Spanish and then help them to bridge that over to English. This can be more difficult if you don't speak the home language, but I have to recommend the use of cognates and providing things to kids bilingually, even if you don't speak the home language, giving them a chance to see what a word means in both languages and compare them, allows them to do that statistical learning.
And then Jennifer, I'm going to let you unmute and ask that question if you, yeah.
Yes, so I have a variety, a huge group of multilingual learners from all different countries. And I was just wondering, like, how does the L1 phonological interference affect the reading speed in English? Because I have a diverse group of English learners, and I've noticed that my native speaking students consistently, it seems like they take longer, which is heartbreaking for me, to see as compared to like my other students. And I wonder if it's just that slight difference that makes it actually more challenging.
Yeah, I agree. There definitely is a degree of interference that our students experience, especially with, I just touched barely on letters that may represent something different in the home language, and learning to see the letter H in English and know what sound it makes in English as opposed to how you would read it in Spanish. It takes a lot of practice. I do have some strategies that I use to directly teach that, but I have to say I only am able to do that with kids who speak Spanish because I'm not as familiar with other languages. So I think it really comes down to like directly and immediately correcting those errors. So I like jump right in and I just say the correct sound. I don't add any other instruction because I don't want to overload and I don't want to contribute to the cognitive demand. But if they're reading and they're saying a sound the way they would say it in the other language, I just immediately provide the correct sound. And after, a bit of fluency practice where I'm jumping in, they start to develop that awareness with more independence.
Thank you.
And then Pat, I'll let you unmute and ask your question really quick too, if you'd like.
Hi, how you doing? I'm just wondering, with linguistic phonics, do you find that if children have like a receptive or an expressive language disorder, that it makes it more difficult? Like, sorry, I'm from Ireland, so I'm not completely familiar with linguistic phonics, but my
Mhm.
understanding is it relies a lot on kind of statistical learning and implicit learning. And if they have a language difficulty, would you still use that, or would you tend to go more towards synthetic phonics, or where would you feel like was the best way to go in that way?
That's a great question. I actually find that this is really useful for kids who may have coexisting challenges with language in either language, especially like articulation or expressive speech challenges, as well as receptive challenges. I went back to the data because this, can you see my mouse? This fifth grader who's second to the right on both graphs was really struggling in English and Spanish with both with articulation and production. I've never seen anything quite like it, and I've also never seen anything like the growth that she made, which was in a very short number of hours. She was able to increase her. She more than doubled her rate. I think she went from like 10 to 24 words per minute, which is not where we want to be in fourth grade, but she had very little instruction with me, and I assume she would keep going up and up. But the accuracy that we also see on the graph on the right is huge. So she was able to apply that articulation and the sound production more consistently in words. There's other strategies that we employ with Ebbly, which is the program that I use that I wasn't really at liberty to teach folks today, but I can't recommend more highly that you go and get trained in it if you're curious about it. The fluency strategies that we use in Ebbly with repeated readings, and there's many ways to do repeated readings, but the specific read back, read again protocol that we use helps students with expressive language challenges to read with more fluency and express with more fluency. But the teacher modeled reading also really helps with the language comprehension piece as well, and allowing the kids to kind of cyclically develop the comprehension and the fluency and the comprehension and the fluency while reading. So I do think that I would still recommend linguistic phonics for kids with speech challenges.
And then what was the name of the program you mentioned for oral language again?
Visualizing and verbalizing. It's a Linda Mood Bell program. There's ways, if you are interested in it and you'd like to send me an email, I'd be happy to discuss. I said I would put my email one more time in the chat, but that program is basically using a picture to guide discussion and oral language expansion, and then you start to back away from using the visuals and work towards basing it off of a text that's been read and developing descriptive abilities and sentence and oral language expansion.
All right. We just have a couple more minutes to wrap up. Um, thank you, Tal. This is really good. It's interesting to see how it works with other languages, so that's really neat. Anything else anyone wants to ask really quick before we wrap up?
Can you reshare the document?
Yes, I'll do
I
that
can
right
go.
now.
Thank you.
Copy link. I'm dropping the link to the slides, which has all those resources linked in as well as the videos. And I'm also throwing my email in there. If you're curious to discuss more, I'm always looking to collaborate and feel free to shoot me a message.